How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
As always, if you like Citizen Kane, that's fine, because we're not here to hate on it. But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder...
Better than Citizen Kane?
So, grab your head, bring your hands, and open your heart as we dive into this week's film, Metropolis.
You know, I'm enjoying these personalized intros that you've gotten these past two times.
Thank you.
These are nice. These are good.
Yeah, I thought this one was really silly.
It is very silly.
But there's not many, like quotables or like...
It's not a quotable movie per se.
Oh, I loved it when they said, she's a witch or whatever. Can't remember what came before that.
Yeah, nothing like Frederson's immortal line, "That's not Maria."
Yeah, or just Moloch.
Moloch.
That's it. Who was Moloch anyway?
You know, that's a good question.
Wow, I guess we'll dive into that.
We'll dive into that. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining
Hello.
us. Hope you're all doing well. Today is a very interesting day on the podcast because this is the very first time that we're looking at something pre-Citizen Kane rather than post-Kane.
Something that people at the time, if they had seen Metropolis and then went and saw Citizen Kane, they might be like, well, it's no Metropolis, you know?
Exactly, yes. Which I think will lead to some really interesting conversations as we move along. But I was thinking about that in prep for today, that I was like, oh, this is like the first time that we're looking at something that predates Citizen Kane, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Because so much of the conversation around Citizen Kane and around like what we've talked about is Kane being like the granddaddy of all of these filmic techniques. But like, there's a lot of very interesting filmic techniques going on in here.
There was like 30 to 40 years of films before Citizen Kane that were also doing things.
Yeah.
So.
Max, tell us a little bit about the film we're taking a look at today.
Oh, man. All right. Let's see if I can. It's been a few days since I took my trip to Metropolis. Metropolis was made in 1927. And that's all I'm going to do as far as production. Because I am worried that yes, there we go. That was the one other thing I had. Damn it, Parker.
Gotcha.
No. But yeah, it's an early science fiction film. It's set in a future big old metropolis, if you will, a big old city. And it's called Metropolis as well. That's what he called it, right? That's what Frederson called it. Yeah. Yeah. And basically there's like a few layers to it. There's like kind of this layer where like all the father's sons hang out, and they're basically just like really privileged dudes who get to do track and meet ladies in a garden.
Absolutely.
And then a woman brings up a whole bunch of children to that layer with the garden and the boys. And one of them, Frederson's son, Freder, whose surname I guess would be Josen, because his father's first name is Joe. And I was, because at first I was like, Frederson. I was like, no, that's not how it worked back then. Anyways, irrelevant. Freder goes down to the worker level. There's a whole bunch of workers down there, and they're working. They're working hard. Or they hardly working. Jesus, Parker, why'd you ask me to do this?
Specifically to watch you fumble your way through.
Fumble my way like I did with Puss in Boots.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah, and basically it's just he goes down there and he has kind of a social, like a political awakening. He's like, wow, what if there's a revolution? There should be a revolution, maybe, against my father. And he falls in love with the woman who's kind of leading this revolution, which is based in spirituality, which is really cool and interesting. Oh, and also it's a silent film.
It is a silent film, yes.
Is that everything?
Pretty much. I think you hit the kind of.
There's a robot in it.
There is a robot that is very, very influential.
Yes.
A direct comparison and inspiration drawn when they were developing C-3PO for the Star Wars movies is that when George Lucas was describing to concept artist Ralph McQuarrie what he wanted, he said, well, he's like, think the Metropolis robot. Like that's kind of the angle that I want you to take.
Machine Man.
And like when you look at them side by side, like it's very obvious that line of influence.
Especially like the legs and kind of like there was some things like in the the body more so than.
Totally. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
It is very interesting.
So yeah, what did I miss, Parker? How do we want to dive into this?
Well, I think the first thing to look at is like just kind of touching base, and you touched base on a little bit, but just giving kind of the historical context of the film, which is the fact that this is a highly influential film. Again, very early in cinema's history, 1927. And this is also a film that comes out of the German Expressionism movement. There's a lot of that with playing with light and shadow, changing of proportions, especially in the underground segments. There's lots of like very augmented, skewed staircases leading on into infinity and things like that. But additionally, this is not the first, because I think that distinction may go to like A Trip to the Moon, right? Georges Méliès, which is late 1800s, I think, like 1890 something. Yeah. Or maybe very turn of the century. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's somewhere around there.
Maybe
I know
1903?
It predates. Maybe
1903 is coming to my mind.
That might be right. I'll have to check.
Yeah.
But that kind of holds the distinction as sort of the first science fiction film ever put on screen. However, this is one of the first feature-length ones, and definitely the most influential for sure.
Absolutely.
And you can see this influence, like we mentioned already. Star Wars was very much influenced by this film. Things like Blade Runner and like the way that those cityscapes are so densely populated kind of come from this film. And that was, I mean, you and I talked about this briefly the other day of like, that's one of my favorite things about this movie is just looking at it and going, how did they do that? Because there's just so many really, really interesting things going on with models and rear projections and all sorts of really interesting things going
like
on
big
for this
cutouts,
early.
like just big painted like cutouts that are clearly that, but then they have like these incorporations of like a crowd running and all of like the cars and trains, which are clearly like little models on like, I'd imagine little strings or something. But that crowd shot of them running on a bridge in the city, I'm just very curious.
I really like that one. There's another one kind of bird's eye view looking down towards the city that probably has at least 4 or 5 different like railways and on-ramps that is filled with cars, and the cars are moving a little bit in traffic, and there's trains coming by, and there's biplanes up in the air, and it's just ridiculously dense. It's so cool.
It's really cool.
I don't know. I wanted to just draw attention to kind of where it sits as a very influential piece of film history, because a lot of films draw from this kind of initial vision of the future as we know it.
And yet also something that a lot of those other films don't really bring with them is this religious aspect, this like religious revolution, this like, you know, I mean, it's interesting in that way. What are your thoughts on that?
So I find that whole aspect to be so fascinating about the film, because it is so woven in to that fabric, and it's very rare to see such overt like religious overtones in a sci-fi piece in the same way. Like literally when you're introduced to, well, not the first time because she comes to the garden, but when Freder goes to search out Maria underground, she's literally in this sort of like makeshift cathedral in the catacombs. There's these, again, that German expressionism, these really tall, elongated crosses and the spotlight, and it very cathedral-esque, but like built into like the natural, you know, space of those catacombs, which is very, very interesting. And I love too that like in the upper levels where the Sons of the Fathers, is that the like official term? Where all of those affluent people live, they refer to like the main headquarters as the new Tower of Babel. And later on, Maria regales the workers with the legend of the original Tower of Babel. And we get this really great flashback. And like, that was another shot that like blew my mind, is just when like the grand architect is standing at the top of the stairs and all the workers are at the bottom, and then they just rush him. They all run up the stairs. I'm like, there's like 200 extras in this shot. It's crazy. It's insane, the like scale that this movie has. I don't know. I really like the religious aspects of it. And I think a really good cross-section of that is seeing Rotwang's character, like the mad scientist, because his space is kind of that weird cross-section of like, it feels very like gothic, but it also is like a scientific laboratory at the same time.
when they first like go to it, that, you know, the titles say like, you know, long forgotten on the streets of Metropolis is an like
centuries old,
like maybe like 2,000-year-old house or something, like centuries old house. And it has kind of that energy of like, wow, you're like, wow, this is like an old sacred, like, you know, house of like a priest or something. But then you go inside and it's just Rotwang's like laboratory. Is this where the mad scientist kind of archetype
it's one of the
starts?
first. I know that
just
like
the look of him with like the crazy hair and like all the beakers and stuff was very like, wow.
I think a lot of that iconography comes from this. I also know that a couple of early like Edison one-reelers of Frankenstein kind of have some of that influence as well. But this is definitely like, as far as that very specific crazed white hair, like mad scientist look, I think a lot of it comes from this 100%.
Yeah. And so Rotwang is someone that, so Freder, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts that I need to bring up, and they all just hit me at once. This is also very much a religious story in that, you know, it's what I alluded to in my very funny intro that everyone laughed at, and everyone clapped too. I was there.
Rounds of applause.
Rounds of applause. They did a standing ovation. Wow, guys. Wow, y'all. But basically the heart is the mediator between the head and the hands. And so really it's like, obviously like Fredersen, the man who designed Metropolis, Freder's father, he is the head, and then the workers in the lower level are all the hands. And then it's Freder is the heart. Like he just comes down and he is the mediator, and that's his mission. He learns about this and he says, well, I am the mediator, which feels very, you know, religious. It feels very Christ allegorical. There's that element to it. But then also you have Rotwang, who is just someone that Fredersen knew in the past. And they both love Hel, his wife?
They both love the same woman, yes.
Yes. And Fredersen ended up marrying her and having a son who is the mediator, who is Freder. And that whole dynamic is super interesting to me. Yeah. Of like Fredersen goes to him. Why does he go there initially?
He goes there because they've been discovering these plans in the pockets of the workers, and he doesn't know what they are. Like it's some sort of diagram. He's like, I don't know what this is.
And he says, you know, when my experts fail me, I come to you.
He's like, I need your advice.
Which again, just feels like such a modern kind of dynamic that you still see, obviously, in a lot of stories.
Right.
Of like, you're the inventor that I shunned or whatever, but I still come to you for, you know, for advice or whatever. And Rotwang unveils his machine man, who is eerie and fantastic, and the performance of that machine, like that robot, is so incredible.
It's really cool.
But yeah, sorry if I jumped around too much, but I wanted to bring up that I really thought that was interesting, of like, obviously like the kind of the Christ allegory, but also just that there's also like, well, yeah, but then also Fredersen, who you would be like is maybe the God archetype. It doesn't fit that at all.
Right.
So it's
not one-to-one, but like there is a lot of it going on.
There's a lot of it.
I do find it very interesting the way the film draws parallels between those religious allegories and allegories in like a capitalistic worker context. Because I really like that whole moment when they're doing the Legend of the Tower of Babel. I'm paraphrasing, but there's something along the lines where one of the intertitles come on and they're like, these great men had dreamed up the vision, but they couldn't build it. Who would build it? And then it immediately cuts to like this really great split diopter shot of all of these like slave workers coming in. And I like that too, that like that's, you know, aside from the religious aspect of, you know, the mediator between the head and the hands being the heart, I like that in the context of like capitalism, of it's like, oh yeah, you can have these grand billionaires with these huge dreams of how they're going to change the world, but they're not the ones doing the work. You need workers to do the work, and you have to find a way to mediate between those two parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that is a very interesting, I think that, and also something that has stood out to me is like, this is, you know, like commentary on capitalism and just like that sort of thing is very prevalent in sci-fi for the rest of time, obviously.
Yeah.
But I feel like this came out at such an interesting, like now, if they were to do a Metropolis now, and I saw that it's on IMDb as logged as like they might remake it and something, and I'm like, okay, all right. But
it's been almost 100 years. I can't be too mad about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, all right. I mean, it'd be interesting to return to this aesthetic with modern technologies, as long as they don't just make it, they don't half-ass it or something.
Yes, as long as it's not Tomorrowland.
Right. And so I think what really stands out to me, though, is that if we were to do a Metropolis today, absolutely they would be critical of the religious aspect. Mm-hmm. There's no way that they would be like, no, this is important. And it's important that the workers feel like religiously, like, what's the word? Involved. Like that is like, that helps them get through it. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because obviously that is the case for a lot of people who have religious beliefs. You know, it helps them get through the difficult aspects of life. But in this modern era where there's just a kind of decrease in, membership of organized religion and spiritual belief because a lot of organized religions end up being a lot like this situation. It's just interesting that I just feel like we wouldn't ever make that today. You couldn't make a movie not in the same way. That's like the working class have convictions to their religion, and that's what helps. And they're right because the heart and its empathy. But like that's the good part about things like Christian religions is that it is supposed to preach, empathy and understanding and connection, which is what this movie's about. But I found that so fascinating of like, why haven't I seen like a religious science fiction film? It's like, oh, because those who make science fiction films stopped believing in religion. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Like it's the seeds of it are here, but I don't think the conversation had quite caught up to the point yet where we are now, which is so much of the discourse around that, just generally speaking in like broad blanket terms, is this idea of science versus religion. Like that seems to be the main argument of the past like 50 years at least is, well, you have your science over there and I have my religion over here and we can't mix the two. No. And they seem to be at odds. Whereas this is a very interesting one where like, again, you could sort of make that argument with like Rotwang being the stand-in as like scientific progress and the people and Maria being the stand-in for like religious progress. But it doesn't seem to be, again, the end of the movie doesn't pit them at odds with each other. It says, hey, why can't we find a middle ground? Right. Except I would also say maybe there is a bit of that in that the machine man takes on it takes on the face of Maria, their religious leader, their preacher, and convinces them to just. This was a super interesting movie to watch in 2023. This is like, because there's a lot going on with AI right now. There's a lot going on with capitalist systems. Yep. And deep fakes, this is, it's very interesting to have like the major conflict in this is that an evil scientist funded basically and like commissioned by a billionaire uses like an artificial intelligence and gives it a human likeness to turn a revolution into what he wants it to be. Not the billionaire, but the inventor himself uses it entirely to convince a whole lot of people to destroy the machines they need to survive, which was just super, super fascinating. This is surprisingly aged very, very well. Yeah, I was thinking about that while I was watching it. I was like, wow, it's insane to me how relevant a lot of this is almost 100 years on. Yeah. And in ways that I'm sure they never could have imagined it being relevant, but it 100% is. It is. So yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about the same thing while I was watching it, like specifically that whole idea of like misinformation and thinking you're hearing somebody say something and they're not. Yeah. The actress who plays Maria, I don't know her name. I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately. I'll look it up. Let's see. Her performance as the machine man as her is really fun. Like it's really fun. You look at her and like for a minute you'd clearly be like, this is not the same person. But again, I don't want to ding that because that's not like an actual like criticism of the film. That's just part of the world. And like, but like her performance is really fun. And
Bridget Helm, I believe.
Okay,
I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
B-R-I-G.
Yeah.
No, yeah. B-R-G-I-T-T-E. Helm.
Yeah.
Bridget.
Bridget? Yeah.
Bridget.
What are your thoughts on the performances in this film? I think that's an interesting question to ask in a silent film, you know, after 70 years of more than that.
I like them for the most part. I think, again, like you have to kind of take a lot of them for their time. It's a lot of pantomiming. It's a lot of kind of melodrama. In that regard, I did find Fredersen's performance to be really modern.
Yeah.
Like his reactions are very, I don't know, understated.
They're very nuanced. Like they're very subtle. It's a very subtle.
He was my favorite one to watch this time around.
Yeah.
Like I really like his performance in this quite a bit.
And
that actor is Alfred Abel.
Yeah, he was really good. I thought he was really interesting in that way, where you have like these German expressionists, you know, they have like their powdered faces, you know, Freder and Rotwing in particular are very like very much pale and very much like that German expressionist. And so is Fredersen, but he like you said, he reads as just like a modern performance. And that just created for a very interesting dynamic, especially when he's with Rotwing. It's literally just like this almost cartoon villain.
Right.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'd almost forgotten about that.
And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition because I'm sure at the time he and the director are probably thinking of this performance as a direct juxtaposition of being like, okay, yeah, you're going to be very understated and very reserved because that's your character. And at the time, I imagine it might have come across as a little stiff. In a good way of being like, oh yeah, he is very standoffish. But now modern sensibilities are such that I'm like, oh no, he's just giving a very like insightful performance. Like there's a lot going on behind the eyes. There's a lot of subtlety here. And I don't read him as stiff. I read him as like quiet and like calculating in a way that I don't know was necessarily the intention at the time.
No. Yeah. I imagine that maybe the intention was be like, well, he's the upper class. You know, he's going to be very proper and stiff compared to, but even then I guess his son's meant to be like young and impulsive and that sort of thing.
But no, I'd like the performances across the board. I think his is definitely a standout. I do like what Bridget is doing with playing Maria versus playing the Machine Man counterpart and just like such a clear distinction between those two characters, which I really love. And this was literally like my Letterboxd review was just referencing this, which is, it always cracks me up when like Freder is hallucinating and he's sick in bed and he's picturing this party that's going on that supposedly Rotwing is holding. And it's just a bunch of men being like ridiculously obsessive and horny over Robot Maria, who is just doing the silliest dance you've ever seen in your life. But they're just like, oh man, that's so hot. Oh God. It just cracks me up every time.
I mean, silly
dances.
Silly dances. It's very, very sexy. Silly and sexy are only a few letters different, Parker. That was very fun. The Machine Man Maria almost moves like a Popeye character.
Very much
like she's very much like heaving her arms around and like it's very fun to watch.
It is. And like her devious expression, like just the raised eyebrow and like the lowering of the head. It's just like, oh yeah.
Like the squinted eye.
It's really funny. It just really gets me every time. It's good.
Really good. But the robot, okay, that's another effect that blew my mind. The lights going up and down the Machine Man when it's taking on Maria's face. Yeah. How did they do that? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about how it's done. A lot of so that's I'll talk about it more in a little bit. So, but like there's a lot about how this movie was put together we don't know because of lost pieces, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But back to your point, that scene is incredible.
There's rings of light. Everybody, if you haven't seen Metropolis, you gotta check it out. But there's rings of light that like go up and down the robot that you would see now. But in 1927, I think I literally leaned forward in my chair and went, "What?" Which is great.
My best guess is either that they're hand animated or it's a separate element composited on top that like they had some sort of electrical equipment shot on a black background that they then superimposed on top. But yeah, it's incredible to look at, and like that sequence is the most iconic of the
course
film.
it was the cover of the Blu-ray that I watched this on.
Yeah.
Which, do you want to talk about the format that we watched, because there are various versions of Metropolis.
So something about early film history, and it is a huge bummer, is that we have lost approximately 80% of the silent era for mostly negligent reasons. What would happen is that the studios that owned the prints of these films didn't take care of them. They didn't store them properly. Film itself is literally just a strip of chemicals, essentially. And if you don't take care of it, then it deteriorates, it molds, it falls into disrepair.
Catches fire.
Exactly.
Which I imagine happened a lot when they were just storing a bunch of film in a warehouse.
Yeah, back in the day, most film was shot on something called nitrate film. And nitrate film, it deteriorates a lot quicker than I can't remember the name of what they ended up doing after that, but there was like a new scientific development of like, hey, we're going to make film with this now, and it's much sturdier. But a huge thing about nitrate film is it just is extremely flammable.
Yeah.
It goes up like a match, like it's just instantaneous. And so, yeah, there have been all sorts of times throughout history where studio vaults caught fire, flooded, generally just weren't taken care of. And there are really amazing preservation efforts that have gone in. Specifically, Martin Scorsese is a huge leader in the preservation world of just putting all sorts of time, money, and resources into trying to save old films. But there's so much that we just don't have anymore. To the point that like there's even, I think there are 2 or 3 Best Picture winners at the Oscars that we don't exist anymore. Yeah. We know they happened because there's a record of them winning the award and a couple of promotional stills, but like those movies are gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's insane that there is a movie out there that won Best Picture that year that like we will never see. And Metropolis is not invulnerable to all of this. So there's a lot of versions of Metropolis floating around. In 2008, I think, according to like the intertitles at the beginning of this, there was a huge effort to restore Metropolis to its feature length, because in addition to losing out on, prints getting lost and damaged, additionally, early cinema history was full of censorship, all kinds. So you would make the film, you'd send it out to a theater, and if the theater didn't like what was in it, they would literally, this is the ages of physical film, they'd splice it out. They'd take a pair of scissors, they would cut out the part in the movie they didn't like, and then they would forget to put it back when they sent it back. And so you just, throughout time, you'd be losing pieces and pieces and pieces of these movies as they were going out and being shown. The version that we watched of Metropolis is about 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think.
Something like that.
Which is about as close to complete as we're going to get.
Basically, right after it premiered, they say this in the intertitles at the start, immediately Metropolis was just cut in a lot of ways due to censorship, just due to, and all of those were thought to be lost forever. The original cut of the film was just like, we don't have that anymore. All we have is the Metropolis that, exists. And then in 2008, is that when it was?
I think that's what it said on the intertitles.
Early to mid 2000s, late 2000s, they found in Buenos Aires, found a full version of Metropolis just there, but it had been transferred onto 16 millimeter. Right. And so the Blu-ray that we have has that film added back in, but it just looks different. Yeah.
So like you'll be watching the film and the aspect ratio will change slightly and the quality of the film will jump down. There's like a lot of scratch lines on it, but like you can see, you're like, okay, this is the continuation of that scene. Which
made for such an interesting viewing experience of just like realizing what they had cut. And it's like, there's a lot going on here that I'm like, some of it I was like, oh, this is just a really interesting, like, conclusion to a scene that wasn't there before, but there's like an entire subplot about 11811, right? Who's just gone.
Yeah.
And just whole entire moments. And it was so interesting to watch a movie and the whole time the movie is going, hey, imagine if the movie didn't have these scenes in it. You're like, well, then that's, I don't know. It's just it made for an interesting watch.
It's a very interesting watch in that regard. And even then, even with this completed version, there are still scenes in the movie where a black screen pops up and it tells you what happens based off of production notes and scripts that they found, where they're like, hey, we still don't have this scene, but this is what happens. And like some of it's very climactic stuff. Like there's a scene that is missing of Fredersen getting in a fight with Rotwang and overpowering him, and Maria escapes. We don't see that. We see the tail end of it. Like there's a shot of Fredersen like standing over Rotwang's unconscious body.
And Maria running away. But
but like again, it's wild that like even with this huge gold mine of finding an intact version of the film with so much of it there's still pieces missing. There's still things that they shot that just are gone. And who knows if they're going to pop up in a private collection somewhere or if they're just completely lost to time. Yeah. But I think that's another thing that's so interesting about not just this film, but like early film history in general that I've always loved and breaks my heart a little bit is just how many ridiculously influential pieces were almost lost to time. That also makes me think of like how many other great, amazing pieces of art existed that we will never see again because they're just gone. Like nobody even knows they happened. Yeah. It's just wild. But yeah, I don't know, this was a very interesting viewing experience because I'd seen this version before, but I'd also seen like back in the days of high school where I was just trying to, find anything I could at local libraries. I think my library had like the version right before this, which is like an hour shorter. And I think that was the first time I watched this movie. And again, really weird watching this stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, there's huge pieces of this that like, again, without them there, it sort of feels like a film of its time, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, things are just jumping along. But it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder if all the rest of those films of their time are like this, where they're missing a bunch of stuff. And we've just assumed that's the way like stories were told back then.
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit when we talked about Citizen Kane initially, which is that a lot of the movie-going public today has a tough stigma around black and white films, even more so silent films.
Yeah.
I've taught classes with undergrads, and we've looked at films like Buster Keaton's Our Hospitality, and I'm always very curious to see what students think of it. And more often than not, they're pleasantly surprised. Like, oh, that was way funnier than I thought like a black and white movie would be. And even then, like even stuff that's much more contemporary than this, like it's just a weird hiccup. I saw, I think you sent it to me, actually. There was somebody on Twitter was commenting about how TikTok, there's an account that's just been uploading the entirety of 12 Angry Men in like, 3-minute chunks or whatever. Yeah. And it's getting insane engagement. Like these Gen Z kids on TikTok are loving this movie. And like scrolling through the comments is just wild. Where like there are people like, this is way better than any black and white movie has the right to be. And it's like, what are you talking about?
That's such an interesting point. I wouldn't say I was ever like one of those people that's like, well, all black and white movies are terrible. But I definitely, as a kid growing up in the 2000s, you're very much like, well, black and white, that means it's boring. That means it's boring and long or whatever. But like watching something like obviously 12 Angry Men or any of the countless black and white and silent films that are just absolutely gorgeous or very funny and entertaining and interesting. I think watching Metropolis, I hadn't watched a silent film in a while. I watched a whole bunch in a semester of college for film history.
Sure.
It was also a class that was in the middle of the day. And I woke up very early to commute to school. So unfortunately, for some of those films, I did end up falling asleep because I was in a big dark auditorium for like 4 hours.
That'll do it.
And that'll do it when you've just eaten and you're tired. But like, so man, I shouldn't have said that. Now I've outed myself. I fell asleep in black and white movies. Oh no. But
I'm going to need you to slide over your film lover's card.
Oh no.
Please, you need to revoke your license.
Return all of your Criterion Blu-rays immediately. You don't like films. You don't like movies.
Max Bennion cinema hater.
Oh no. Yeah. I should just that's my title. But watching Metropolis, it's so fun to watch a silent film because, once you're really engaging with it, it's kind of like watching Shakespeare, like a Shakespeare production where at a certain point your brain starts translating and you start really engaging. Like, for me, every time I start a Shakespeare play, I'm always like, okay, I got to get into it. And then by like the second act, I'm like, all right, I'm with it. I understand everything you're saying and I'm having a great time. And then I think the same thing happened with Metropolis here, where like at the start, I was kind of like, okay, all right. Yep. It takes a lot of, in the modern era, it takes a lot of mental effort to like focus in on this and to really get engaged with it. But once I was like, it was just zooming by. Yeah. And there's a certain magical turn to it where at a certain point, I just forget that it's silent. I'm just completely engaged. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really powerful moment. And I really enjoyed that aspect of watching Metropolis because I hadn't seen this before. You'd seen it twice before, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. 2 different versions, or at least one other version and then this one. But I'd never seen this before. And so that was just a very fun and exciting thing. I'm a big fan of science. I like a big science fiction movie. I like a big city. I like trains and planes.
We love a train.
We love a train. I'm fascinated by the job that Freder ends up doing, which is to point handles at lights on like a clock. It's like a clock, but it's just lights, and you're just like,
moving the.
Yeah, and my toxic trait is thinking that I could do that. I think I could just do that.
Shift.
I think I could just do that for a 10-hour shift, and I'd have fun.
That's one of my favorite moments of the movie is like he's doing that and then it superimposes the clock on top of it and he's desperately trying to get the minute hand to go to 12 so that the shift is over at 2 and it just keeps going back the other direction. He cries out. He's like, Father. He's like, will 10 hours never end? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. That was big mood, buddy. Super relatable.
Literally fighting a clock to get it to get your shift over. Absolutely. No, there's a lot of great stuff like that. But you also watched this with your partner Kate. What was that? Watching it with someone who hadn't seen it before.
She really liked it. She really liked it. Again, she's been feeling a little sick, and so she also dozed off near the end. Mm-hmm. But she told me when she woke up, she's like, I really want to like sit down and finish that because like I really was loving everything that I was watching with it so far. But yeah, no, she really, really enjoyed it. And I would love to hear more if you have anything to say about like this being your first watch, because this is the first time for us where one of us has seen the movie but the other one hasn't.
That's true.
So I would love to know like if they're, you've talked about a little bit, but if there's anything more you have to share about like watching this for the first time.
I mean, it had that magical turn for me where I just got really invested in it. And even from the start, I was like interested in it. It just, at a certain point, it became a story that I was actively invested in. And pretty early on too. It's not like it took like an hour for me to be like, okay, I'm interested. But again, I found it to be super, it's incredible. There's absolutely a factor of watching movies from this era of just like, how did you had like some of the worst cameras, like you had to deal with so much. Your film was literally made of like fire and the fact that this exists in any form is incredible, but also just the fact that people are able to make this and Metropolis is so, well, I don't know. It really worked for me. As far as like a first viewing experience, I didn't know really what this was about. So again, I was very surprised by the religious aspects, which I liked. I thought that was nice. It's nice. I'm not like anti having a belief in something. So that was really, I mean, I really liked it. And I really liked that there was a robot in it. I love a robot. I love a mad scientist. I like that the scientist's name was Rotwang. That's a little bit funny. A little bit funny, not very funny, just a little bit funny. His first 2 initials are CA, so the full name is CA Rotwang, and it feels that's a little funny. It's not the funny. It's a little funny. But I really liked it. That's all I can say. I am curious what like your favorite part of the movie is. I'm curious, like, do you have like a favorite moment? Because obviously there's like the iconic, like the robot becomes Maria.
The robot transformation scene is pretty incredible. I really like the Tower of Babel flashback.
Yes.
I think that's really visually impressive and very, very cool. And there's lots of like very fun. So like when you look at early film history, so much of it is basically filmed versions of stage plays. Yeah. You lock the camera down where the audience would be. Everything is played on a flat plane to camera, in the way that you would be doing on a stage. And a lot of early cinema is like that. And I love how much this is embracing the fact that it is film and it's embracing the fact that it can be cinematic. And it's just little things, right? Like, so with that whole dream sequence flashback, whatever you want to call it, of the Tower of Babel, there's this really great shot where they show, the tower in all of its majesty, and it stays in the exact same spot of the frame as it dissolves to like the city founders looking at a model of this tower, like studying it, thinking about how they're going to build this thing. And again, it's the exact same model, right? Like they're using the same model in the movie is the same model they're looking at in the scene, but just that dissolve is super clean. There's another one of those, which is really great, which is when Freder goes down and the machine malfunctions and it transforms into Moloch, and it's, and it's this really great, like really slow dissolve between, again, crazy that they're doing this in the 20s where they're dissolving only partially segments of the film. So like you've got the big scary Moloch, like, face. Sacrificial god and the face. And then the people being sacrificed slowly morph into the workers, and the edges of the frame turn back into the machine, but the face still stays in the center. Yeah. And it's crazy that like all of those elements just dissolve into one another from different exposures and different pieces of film, and it's composited together in that way. It's incredible.
Yeah, and it's just like a great. Sorry, I just want to give quick props to that. I just love that as like a visual way of just saying like, they're being sacrificed to the machine. Like they're being, and like that's all that basically Freder sees that one kind of vision, and then is like, all right, I'm their savior. All right, time to change everything about what I know of the world. Which, I mean, to be fair, if I saw that vision, that might kind of spook me into changing my ways a little bit. Yeah, if I saw, I think more people should see Moloch. I think more people should see that just so they...
Look, all I'm saying is that everything going wrong with Tesla and Twitter would be fixed if Elon Musk saw Moloch.
Let's campaign to show Elon Musk Moloch. Let's find a way to make him physically see it in real life.
Perfect. That sounds great. I mean, the flooding of the city at the end is pretty incredible.
That was really,
It's just insane, the practical effects going on of just pumping this set full of water. And I can only imagine just, resetting those takes and doing it again if something went wrong.
Yeah.
And there's also, again, like it's little things. Obviously the big standout moment is the robot transformation, but like there's so many little techniques that draw my eye, like from a film history standpoint. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. A really simple one that is super effective for me is, for context, for anybody who doesn't know, film cameras back in the day were enormous. These things were like 8 feet tall by like maybe 10 feet long. Yeah. They were just these giant boxes. And sometimes they were on wheels and sometimes they weren't, but they're just huge and heavy and like very difficult to maneuver. And a lot of this movie is kind of locked down and there isn't a whole lot going on, but there's one or two shots that just blew my mind that I'm like, how are you moving the camera like that? So one specifically is when Freder goes to Rotwing's house because he hears Maria in distress and he goes to look for her. And it's very like haunted house, like the doors keep opening and closing and leading him further, and it's very fun. But he gets down to the basement and the door closes and he's trying to find a way out. And in the corner, he spots Maria's shawl. And the camera moves forward towards the shawl, and the actor reaches his hand into frame to grab it as if it's a POV shot from him, like walking up and leaning down. It's a really cool shot for 1927. I'm like, how are you moving the camera like that? That's crazy.
Absolutely. The climax to this really, just the amount of big dancing going on was great, but also everything with the chasing. They're chasing Maria through the streets because they think that she is, the original Maria, the good Maria. They think that she is the witch who convinced them all to destroy the machines, because that is what the machine man convinces them to do as Maria. And them chasing her, or no, they're just running through the streets and then they see her and then they chase her. But like that shot of them running across a bridge in Metropolis, and it's like a really long, far away shot of a bridge in a city, but the city is like cardboard cutouts and model work, but the crowd running. And did they just film the crowd from really far away and then splice that film? That would be, that's how you do it, right?
Yeah, that'd be my assumption, is they just spliced it in.
It's nuts. It's really cool. I loved that.
It's really, really great.
Yeah, and again, just like, I think what really stood out to me in this film, it's been like, I watched it, I think on Monday or Tuesday, and we're recording at the time, it's on Saturday. And so it's been a minute. So it's not as fresh in my mind, but just really impressed again with just how captivating it is. Again, I don't want to say that in like a condescending way of like, wow, this is pretty captivating. This is better than any black and white film has any right to be.
Yeah, but it's almost a century old.
It is. I would say that this was more captivating than Nosferatu, which is a century old. I mean, that's not what the podcast is. It's not better than Nosferatu. And I love Nosferatu. But I think obviously I like this more than Nosferatu. It's got a robot in it. Maybe if Nosferatu had a robot in it.
That'd push it over the top. But, do you see my point? Is just like, I think this is, totally. I think on its own, not even just as the era it came out in, I think this is really captivating. So. Well, I think another thing to like maybe mention is the fact that predominantly culture-wise, it seems like the layman understanding of the silent era is mostly referring back to comedies rather than dramas. Yeah. So like people know who Charlie Chaplin is. Mm-hmm. Pretty much on the street, you can show somebody a picture and they're like, oh yeah, that's Chaplin, right? Like they may never have seen a single Chaplin film, but they understand him and his place in film history to a certain extent. So I think part of that, kind of to your point of being kind of surprised that this is engaging as it is a lot of like what people talk about within the silent era is usually comedy driven of Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin. And the dramas seem to be kind of pushed to the wayside a little bit because some of the things you were talking about of like, you really have to hone in, you really have to focus with silent comedies. So much of it is visually based gags. Right. Whereas something like Metropolis, you really need to be paying attention to the title cards
and like
as they're explaining the story
and understanding the world and understanding what the characters and who they are and what's going on.
Like there is a hurdle there to be sure. So I think it is a testament to the movie that it is as engaging as it is on its own merits.
Absolutely, and I recommend that people check out this 2.5 hour silent science fiction film.
Yeah, this is a Kino release.
I think. It is. Yeah. Get the 2011 Kino release, and you're all set. And it's really good. It's really good. The soundtrack in this is incredible. Like the score is so bombastic and orchestral, and like so much of it is really cool. Again, as an early example of like film scoring, of how much of it is synced in, like a big motif of the movie is synced up with the ticking of the clock and the moving of the machines. Yes. Which is really cool. I guess that's my question. Was the score for this is the score for this that would have been released at the time?
This is the original score. Okay. Obviously re-recorded. So like I think this is a different conductor. I think they did it with the Berlin Philharmonic or something. Which it's a recent like I don't know if this recording was done for like the Kino release or if it was done earlier and they just had the masters, but it's of the last like 30 years a recording, but the music is written of the time it was written for the film.
That's really, I was curious about that just because I know that there are certain silent films which didn't really have like music, obviously, specifically. Yeah, there's some,
I think,
or am I wrong?
I remember I should have watched it in prep for this, but like years and years ago when I watched this new compilation for the first time, the new restoration, on the Blu-ray, there's some sort of special feature about the soundtrack. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's like 80% of it is original music. And then they've written a few pieces like in the style of the original composer to kind of fill in the gaps.
Okay, gotcha.
Because again, I think what happens, like all of this, obviously there is no original recording because when this film was played, it would be played with live orchestra. Right. And I'm pretty sure that somewhere along the line, like the, master composing notes of this actual score were lost or damaged or something like that. So I imagine they could, have compiled what they can and then went in and kind of finessed the rest of it a little bit. But it is predominantly the work of the original composer, which is really great.
That's really great. Interesting that there isn't really any like personal technologies in this. There's no here's a flashlight that I have, or like obviously they're not going to have, but like it's 1927.
But I guess they do have flashlights.
They have flashlights that yeah, but like it's just interesting to me that there's no like weird little gadgets. That was the one thing of like science fiction where I was expecting, but really they drive 1920s cars. There's planes going around. Like I love this as like an idea of like, this is a future city, but technology is the same. It's the same. We have the same, we just have bigger buildings and more densely populated cities and a horrible layer of workers living
except
in
there is one of the it's a very early version of FaceTime at the very end of the movie when the machines are going haywire, Fredersen, he like picks up his phone and a panel on the wall shows like the main engineer down below also talking to him, and he's like, it's going up, and that it's like, so yeah, there's like
I literally forgot about that. There's a little bit of that, but like that was interesting. For the most part, it's very like not technology based.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a robot and there's cars, but like it's not like I've got to scan this thing to go there. It's just like there's elevators, and it's just all the technology is very of the time aside from the robot, obviously.
And along those lines, I don't know if I entirely agree with this, but I see where people are coming from, where a lot of people point to this as a very early like steampunk piece of media.
Sure.
I don't think it's entirely there.
No.
Like I get what they're talking about, because it kind of relates to what you're talking about of like low tech future.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. It's a lot of industrial mechanics, but it doesn't quite feel like it completely falls into that.
Yeah, I would say there's not enough steam.
What was the term you coined?
Oh, well,
I really liked what you said.
It was a term that I saw in a Letterboxd review.
Oh, okay.
Someone else called it ray gun gothic.
Yeah.
Which I absolutely adore and would like to see more, please.
Yeah, give us some more ray gun gothic.
More ray gun gothic, please. But again, there's no guns in this.
No.
There's not a single gun in this. Mm-hmm. And that's how you know it's a utopia. But yeah, no ray guns. Just
no ray guns. But just the vibe.
The vibe is ray gun gothic. I love that of like a gothic, let's do some more gothic future. Let's do some more gothic utopia. I love that.
Speaking of gothic, my last little fun fact, and then we can move on to criteria, is I do know that Tim Burton has cited this as a huge inspiration for his Gotham in the Batman movies.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So like if you look at like the architectural design, and so much of his work is inspired by like German Expressionism. So it's not surprising.
A bit of Art Deco.
Like his version of Gotham City 100% feels like could be the neighboring city to Metropolis.
So you mean that Gotham and Metropolis are neighbors, Parker? What? Do you know? I don't actually know. I should have looked this up. Do you know, is Superman's Metropolis named after this? Oh, I'm sure it is.
I would imagine so.
Parker, I wasn't going to bring it up because when we went to the movies a few weeks ago, there was one of those little pre-movie things, and they were like, classic science fiction film Metropolis, and then they were like, also the name of Superman City. And you literally went, they had to bring it in, didn't they?
They had to make it superheroes.
I'm turning it around to you. You had to make it Batman and Superman, didn't you?
Look, I was just talking about Batman. You're the one who made a joke about neighboring cities, all right? Because you did this.
You said they were...
No, don't put this on me. No,
I didn't do this, Parker. You did this.
Dear listener, please write in and let us know whose fault is this? Who messed this up? Who do we blame? Who's picking up the check?
Yeah, the city this is from Wikipedia.
Oh, wow.
And I trust the Wikipedia editors. It's the one thing they devote their lives to. I'm turning it around. All my elementary school teachers were like, you never know who's editing. I'm like, yeah, that guy who devotes his life to this for free.
Yeah.
I trust him. All right. I trust their system. Okay.
Yes.
It says the city that Superman protects was actually named after the 1927 silent film Metropolis.
Hell yeah.
In the original script for Metropolis, the name of the robot was Futura. But yeah, and then Fritz Lang reported that the film was born from his first sight of the skyscrapers in New York in October 1924.
There is a lot of that.
Let's keep tracing the etymology of Metropolis. But yeah, I mean, the word Metropolis has to have, obviously it existed before this. This is based on a book, but where was it a word before? Is it German? Yeah, so a metropolis is a large city or conurbation, which is a significant economic, political, whatever. But where does the word come? Metropolis is a Greek word. I was going to say it sounded Greek, meaning mother and city. So it means like mother city.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. Duh, because Acropolis.
Right.
There it is. Okay, yeah. Gotcha.
This is a dumb question, but I'm doing it anyway. Sorry, we're going a little long. Would you rather live in this metropolis or Superman's Metropolis?
Probably Superman's Metropolis.
Yeah, I don't want to be a worker. I would definitely want to be a son of a father.
Yeah, this seems to be like the class distinction here seems to be a lot harsher than
That's true.
What's going on over the David planet.
The worst thing in that Metropolis is like there's some crime, but we also have a guy who's there to fight it. So
yeah, exactly.
I feel pretty good about that.
I think so.
I'm more willing to live in that Metropolis than Gotham.
I'd say so.
Between Tim Burton's Gotham and this,
Yeah.
yes, I'd still choose Gotham. All right, I don't want to work. It looks terrible to be a worker in this
Yeah,
Metropolis.
it doesn't seem fun to be.
You live in an underground city. Your children all wear rags.
Yeah, basically mole people.
And I know I said earlier I could do it, but I couldn't do it. Turning arms of a fake clock all day?
Nah.
Meaningless. It seems meaningless.
What's the point? Yeah.
All right, criteria.
All right. So this one's interesting. Historical or technical relevance?
Historical relevance, I think this is pretty on par with Citizen Kane.
I think so.
This helped develop a visual genre in a few different genres, probably. But technical, I mean, did this pioneer?
I mean, a lot of the model work is very revolutionary for sure.
Sure.
I guess my question is, I'm just trying to think of like, how many films are directly inspired by Citizen Kane versus how many films are directly inspired by this, you know?
Yeah.
And that seems like an easier pull. Like it's easier to make the argument for Metropolis just because it's a genre film. Like it's so high concept and you can kind of directly draw lines of like, oh yeah, look, this design shows up in, you know, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow or whatever.
Yeah.
But so many of like the techniques in Citizen Kane are being used everywhere else.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I mean this is still, this one's tough because it is a very well-renowned piece of film history.
It is.
Maybe we circle back to this one.
Let's circle back to it.
Because this is a tough one.
This is
a
like
tough one to split
and
hairs
that's
on.
the toughest criteria as well for this.
Yeah.
I think the other two. Well, I'm very curious for the we haven't talked about this
so
yet.
how well is this doing what it's trying to do?
Very well.
I think so.
I think it knocked it out of the park. I think it's. I mean, is there anything for you that stands out as like, well, that could have been done a little better?
I mean, the only thing that really comes to mind, and this is more of a personal taste thing and like more of like a recency bias, I assume, is subtle this movie is not. A lot of its imagery, a lot of its messages are very, very heavy.
I mean, it opens with its theme in words. It opens with, yeah.
Whereas like Citizen Kane is definitely more modern in that regard.
Yeah.
As far as like it doesn't wear it completely on its sleeve in that way. But I mean, this is 1927. Like I can't really hold it against it.
Right. And that's also part of it. It just feels like that's part of what it's doing.
Right.
They're very much trying. It's not like they were trying to make a subtle film. They were trying to make a grand story with a theme that's very strong. And that is it's almost like this is the point of the, you know.
Yeah. So I think for me personally, I'd probably give the point to Metropolis just because I think like I'm more engaged with what the film is trying to do and what it's trying to say. And like the arguments of religion versus science, capitalists versus workers, like all of those themes are more interesting to me than Billionaire is Sad.
Right. Yeah.
What about you?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm with you. I just feel like in my perception of it, I feel like Metropolis just did it very well. It just did everything very well. And so I think I'll give it to Metropolis. But with again, this is like I think this is the closest it's been for me of films that we've looked at so far.
Yeah.
Whereas like they're both, you know, it's not like one of them's giving the other like a run for its money. It feels like they're very, very close.
No, I think that's completely fair.
Yeah. Do you? Sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Or were you elaborating?
No.
Oh,
I was
okay.
moving on to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
All right. Well,
Anyway,
floor is yours.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was going to ask, do you emotionally connect with this film? What is, or at least in the way that it's asking you to, which is, I suppose, caring for Maria, right? Caring for like the stakes of the workers, disliking the machine man.
I don't know. I think I am, but also at the same time, like, I find myself mostly being irritated with a lot of the characters.
Okay.
Because, like, none of them are entirely sympathetic. Like, the workers, I feel for them in the sense that I feel for humanity, but they are sort of portrayed as blind, dumb, and stupid. Like they're very quick to anger. They're very quick to become a mob. They're very quick to not really think for themselves.
Yeah.
Which isn't a great light for them. Same thing with Maria. Like she seems very, but again, that's the archetype she's playing, right? Is very like Mother Mary. Yeah. You know, complete innocence and frailty and things like that.
But keep in mind, this is the very subjective criteria. Yeah. So you are allowed to just say you didn't like that. you don't have to reason it.
But do I like it more than I like? Am I emotionally connecting with it more than Citizen Kane is the question. Right. And I would say yes.
Okay.
I don't think it's really like, I'm not walking away being like, wow, faith in humanity restored. Like it's not making me think about anything other than like the big questions of, oh yeah, like crazy that we're still having these conversations 100 years later.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What about you?
For me, I was fully, I've also not seen this before. So I was fully concerned that they were going to kill the wrong Maria. And in that way, that very much emotionally invested me, in that I was like, the robot is literally having a big party in the other room. I wish that you all would just be aware of that. And I was very relieved because a part of me was like, Maria might be like a sacrificial character. Sure. So I was very invested in that. And I think that, I was very invested in, I think that it worked for me of like Freder immediately being like, oh, this is bad. This needs to change. And I found that very like endearing to me of like, wow, like you literally saw some sad kids and a beautiful lady and you went down, and then you saw Moloch and then you were like, all right, we got to change some stuff. And also, this is something I did kind of want to mention earlier. I think it's interesting that Fredersen is not played as a complete villain. Whereas again, I feel like in a modern version of this story, obviously the billionaire architect who created the city and he literally says the line of like, the people are in the place they belong. Like Freder's like, what happened to the people who helped you build the city? He's like, they're where they belong. And he's like, where they belong. Like, I loved everything with Freder, like challenging his father on that. And that his father he's not actively being like uncaring. And he is. But for some reason, I didn't hate him completely.
He's sympathetic.
And I think that it helps in his, again, the actor's portrayal of him being, he's not villainous. He's not over the top. He seems like a very reasonable man. And everything the thing that I didn't emotionally buy into was everything with Hel, the woman, Fredersen's wife and the woman that Rotwang loved. Didn't really buy into that as much, but I did love how eerie the robot was, which was the important part of that storyline to me. So yeah, I didn't love this idea of like, well, Freder is a savior who needs to be here. I was like, I don't know. I like it more if he's just like, I'm doing work. I didn't like that he was like, I am the mediator. I was like, all right, you've been here for like 5 minutes. Like chill out a little, dude. So on that level, I can understand what you're saying of like, it's not subtle. And I wish that there were a few things that they just, but that's personal preference. But sure. I was very emotionally invested in saving Maria, and in that the people would burn the correct. They knew that the robot was a robot. I was so stoked when the robot. I knew where it was going when Maria burns, and then the robot is there. I loved everyone's reactions to that they were all just like genuinely like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. Yeah, I really liked it. So I'm giving the point to Metropolis.
That's fair. Well, circling back around now that we've had time to think about it, I think I'm probably going to have to give historical and technical relevance still to Citizen Kane. Yeah. Because again, just going off of the phrase, it's the Citizen Kane of blank. Like that is a term that even non-film people use. Yep. And I'm like, okay, looking at two very early films in cinema history, looking at like what their influence was and what their like historical impact is, I think I'm going to have to give that one to Citizen Kane. Sure. Despite this being a very, very, like it's splitting hairs because this is a super influential movie. But
I do think that, and again, it's recency bias, whatever you want to call it. But like, obviously, if you say Citizen Kane, people know what that is. If you say Metropolis, some people will be like the Greek word or some people are like Superman City, the Superman City.
No, that's a fair point.
And again, that's nothing Metropolis couldn't, it's not their fault. No. But I do think that Citizen Kane overall, I mean, obviously Metropolis has left a large impact on things that followed, but I think that Citizen Kane, on a filmmaking standpoint, is still takes the point. So
yeah, I think that's fair, but
cool.
Not that it matters because it's 2 out of 3 already in Metropolis's favor.
Metropolis,
so
yeah, I'd say Metropolis
wins, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I'd say it's better,
yeah,
but it's very close. This one's the closest it's been.
I think so.
I think
so. You could flop it either direction, and a lot of it I think comes down to your and I's personal preferences of like cool robots.
Cool robots. It's neat.
All right.
Cool.
Well, very fun. This was a good time. Again, I'm really excited that we got to take a look at something that was pre-Kane. I think that gives us a nice perspective, and I think we've got a few more of those in the pipeline. Not a whole lot, but a couple more, which
eventually.
I'm excited about. Yeah, we'll work up to some more.
Remind me what's next, Parker.
Next time, the next time we record, we are once again jumping into one that neither of us have seen, which is Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
I forgot that was next.
Yeah, that's next.
Great.
Which I'm very excited about.
Super fun to go from Metropolis to Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah, speed run to the 80s, baby. Let's go.
Let's do it. Man, it's wild.
Excited.
It's not even 20 years from Metropolis to Citizen Kane.
No. Not quite.
And it's a little over 40 to Ridgemont from Citizen Kane?
From Citizen Kane, yes.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
Me too. I think that'll be very, very fun. I'm excited to check that one out, see what we think of it.
Yes. Great.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks as always, everyone.
And please remember that the heart is the mediator between the head and the hands.
Yes.
That's
very
what
important.
Fritz Lang wants you to know.
Yeah, that's what we all need to carry with us, I think.
All right, bye.
We'll catch you next time, everyone.